From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Regarding the question as to climate change, I think the president was fairly straightforward. We're not spending money on that anymore. We consider that to be a waste of your money to go out and do that.
In what the Trump White House bills as America First budget, it calls for an unprecedented $54 billion increase in military spending, while slashing environmental, housing, education, diplomatic programs, as well as billions from the United Nations. The big winners are the Pentagon and Homeland Security. We'll get response from former presidential candidate Ralph Nader, longtime consumer advocate. Then, is President Donald Trump's top counterterrorism advisor, Sebastian Gorka, a member of a Hungarian far-right Nazi-allied group? Leaders of the Teziren, which the State Department says was under the direction of the Nazi government of Germany, say Gorka took a lifelong oath of loyalty to their group. Gorka wore the group's medal on his lapel at a presidential inauguration ball. He's defended it as a way to remember his father.
In 1979, my father was awarded a decoration for his resistance to dictatorship, and although he passed away 14 years ago, I wear that medal in remembrance of what my family went through and what it represents today to me as an American.
If Gorka is a member of the Teziren, but failed to disclose this on his immigration application, it could make him inadmissible to the country under the Immigration and Nationality Act. We'll get response from the Jewish American Forward, the reporter who broke the story. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. On his first trip to Asia, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the United States will consider taking military action against North Korea while speaking in Seoul.
Let me be very clear. The policy of strategic patience has ended. We're exploring a new range of diplomatic, security, and economic measures. All options are on the table.
This morning, Tillerson also visited the demilitarized zone on the border between North and South Korea. This week, the U.S., Japan, and South Korea carried out 2 days of military training exercises, sending warships to the same area where North Korea fired 4 missiles a week earlier. The U.S.'s elite SEAL Team 6 took part in the War Games for the first time. The War Games coincide with a U.S. military buildup in the region. Over the last few weeks, the U.S. has been deploying a missile defense system known as THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, to South Korea. The U.S. has now also announced it'll be deploying unmanned attack drones to South Korea. During Tillerson's trip, he's endorsed the proposed dramatic cuts to the State Department budget, despite warnings the cuts would decrease the U.S.'s ability to carry out diplomatic efforts to resolve conflicts. Defense Secretary James Mattis once famously said while serving as the commander of the U.S. Central Command, quote, "If you don't fund the State Department fully, then I need to buy more ammunition," unquote. Secretary of State Tillerson's trip to the demilitarized zone came after he visited Japan, where he also called for a different approach to North Korea, saying diplomatic efforts so far have failed. Ahead of his visit, protesters again rallied in Okinawa to protest U.S. military bases on the island. House Speaker Paul Ryan lost more support for the Republican health plan, with top party leaders admitting Thursday they do not have enough votes to push the legislation through the full House. The Budget Committee narrowly approved the bill Thursday in a 19-17 vote. All Democrats on the committee voted against the legislation, as did 3 Republicans: Virginia Republican Congressmember Dave Bratt, Alabama Republican Congressmember Gary Palmer, and South Carolina Republican Congressmember Mark Sanford. Top Republicans and the White House have admitted they may make changes to the bill in order to pass it through the House, although Speaker Ryan is facing a divided Republican opposition, with some members of his party calling for Medicaid to be cut even faster, while others are calling for Medicaid and other protections for low-income constituents to be protected. President Trump's proposed budget came under fire Thursday from both Democratic and Republican lawmakers. The 2018 budget calls for an unprecedented $54 billion increase in military spending, while slashing environmental, housing, diplomatic, and educational programs. It also calls for a 31% cut to the Environmental Protection Agency and the elimination of 3,200 jobs. If approved, the EPA's budget would become the smallest it's been in 40 years. On Thursday, Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney called funding climate change programs a waste of money.
Regarding the question as to climate change, I think the president was fairly straightforward. We're not spending money on that anymore. We consider that to be a waste of your money to go out and do that. So that is a specific tie to his campaign.
President Trump's proposed budget would also cut spending for the State Department by 28% and slash billions of dollars in funding for the United Nations at a time when the UN says the world is facing its biggest humanitarian crisis since World War II. Famine. On Thursday, Human Rights Watch called on Trump to continue funding human rights programs worldwide.
Many conflicts have their roots in human rights violations and abuses. And so for the U.S. to pull back with funding could spark instability and lead to an increase in abuses. Congress has the opportunity to step in, and certainly they should step in and make sure that the U.S. does not shy away from the commitments that it's had to maintaining the international human rights system that has been in place since World War II, including the UN.
President Trump's budget also threatens numerous programs to help the poor in the United States, including the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which helps the poor pay for heat during the winter, and the Community Development Block Grant Program, which partially funds, among other things, Meals on Wheels to feed the elderly, the poor, veterans, and disabled people. We'll have more on Trump's proposed budget with Ralph Nader after headlines. President Trump is continuing to stand by his unsubstantiated claims President Obama tapped his phones at Trump Tower during the 2016 election, even as top legislators from both parties continue to reject the allegation. On Thursday, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Chair Richard Burr and Vice Chair Mark Warner issued a statement saying, quote, "Based on the information available to us, we see no indications that Trump Tower was the subject of surveillance by any element of the United States government either before or after Election Day 2016, unquote. The statement came only hours after Trump told Fox News' Tucker Carlson he'd be providing evidence soon and that his allegation was based in part on a report he'd seen on Fox News.
I watched your friend Bret Baier the day previous where he was talking about certain very complex sets of things happening and wiretapping. I said, wait a minute, there's a lot of wiretapping being talked about.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer also tried to defend Trump's unsubstantiated allegation during a contentious 20-minute exchange with reporters during Thursday's press briefing.
Are you saying that the president still stands by his allegation that President Obama ordered wiretapping or surveillance of Trump Tower, despite the fact that the Senate Intelligence Committee says they see no indication that it happened? Does the president still stand by the allegation?
First of all, he stands by it, but again, you're mischaracterizing what happened today.
No,
the Senate, I know.
Exactly from their statement.
I understand that, and at the same time, they acknowledge that they have not been in contact with the Department of Justice. So, but again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. It's interesting. Hold on.
President Trump is meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel today at the White House. The two are planning to hold a joint news conference, Trump's first since he claimed, without offering any evidence, that Obama tapped his phones at Trump Tower. After the news conference, Trump will head back to Florida for his fifth trip to his Mar-a-Lago resort since taking office. The Hill reports Trump has now spent nearly a quarter of his time in office at his private resort. President Donald Trump's top counterterrorism advisor, Sebastian Gorka, is facing calls to resign after the Jewish-American newspaper The Forward reported Gorka is a sworn member of a Hungarian far-right Nazi group. The Forward reported Thursday that members of the Vitezi Rend have confirmed Gorka took a lifelong oath of loyalty to their group, which the U.S. State Department says was under the direction of the Nazi government of Germany during World War II. If the report is true, it means Gorka may have lied on his U.S. immigration application, which requires people to disclose ties to such organizations. Gorka's denied reports of his involvement with the Nazi-allied group, telling Tablet magazine, quote, "I have never been a member of the Vitesse Rend," unquote. We'll have more on Sebastian Gorka later in the broadcast with the Forward reporter who broke the story. In Syria, at least 40 people have died after an airstrike struck a mosque in the middle of evening prayer in the village of Al-Hina Thursday night. The Pentagon has confirmed it carried out an airstrike Thursday night in the same area, but it denies hitting the mosque. Instead, the Pentagon claims its strike hit al-Qaeda meeting that was being held 50 feet away from the mosque, which the U.S. military claims is still standing. Syrian activists and on-the-ground journalists reject the U.S. military's account. This is journalist Bilal Abdul Karim.
When you look just behind me, this was all a part of the masjid or the compound. And the U.S. government has admitted that they launched an airstrike here just last night. But they said they did it 50 feet from the actual mosque. You can look and you can see that the mosque is right here. And all of this, which has been hit behind me, is all a part of the mosque compound.
In New York, a second hearing has been scheduled in the case of two indigenous Namibian tribes that are suing the German government to demand compensation for Germany's genocide of 100,000 people in Namibia between 1904 and 1908. The killings were carried out by the German imperial troops when the region was a German colony. The killings are considered to be the 20th century's first genocide. Brazil's largest city, Sao Paulo, ground to a halt Thursday as transportation workers, teachers, and other public sector workers staged a 24-hour general strike to protest Brazilian President Michel Temer's proposed pension reforms, as well as widespread corruption and impunity for politicians. Brazil's Attorney General is currently seeking to investigate 83 lawmakers over allegations of corruption. This is one of the protesters.
It angers me to see the country in ruins because of their politicians thieving. Now we have to fix things because of this thieving they've done. Their privileges that they have always had, pensions for their children that they have, and now we have to pay for this. I am not going to pay this bill. I will pay for my bill.
Back in the United States, the fast food giant McDonald's briefly appeared to take on President Trump on Thursday when the corporate account tweeted out, quote, "Real Donald Trump, you are actually a disgusting excuse of a president, and we would love to have Barack Obama back. Also, you have tiny hands," unquote. The tweet was swiftly deleted within 20 minutes, and McDonald's later apologized, claiming its account had been hacked. McDonald's head of global communications, Robert Gibbs, previously worked as President Obama's press secretary. An EPA official is facing allegations he sought to stop an investigation into Monsanto's Roundup. Official Jess Rowland was in charge of testing the cancer risks of the herbicide. But according to a court filing, Rowland reportedly told a Monsanto manager on a conference call in 2015, quote, "If I can kill it, I should get a medal," in reference to an investigation into the chemicals in Roundup. A federal judge says Rowland appeared to have a, quote, "highly suspicious relationship with Monsanto." Rowland also oversaw a committee that found there was not enough evidence to conclude glyphosate, one of the key chemicals in Roundup, causes cancer. In Florida, the top prosecutor for Metropolitan Orlando has announced she will not seek the death penalty in any first-degree murder case.
Careful review and consideration of the new statute, under my administration, I will not be seeking death penalty in cases handled in my office.
State Attorney Aramis Ayala's announcement Thursday sparked outrage because she was set to prosecute the case of Markeith Lloyd, who's accused of killing his pregnant ex-girlfriend, who was an Orlando police officer. Following her announcement, Florida Governor Rick Scott first called on Ayala to recuse herself from the case, and then when she refused, he removed her from the case and reassigned it to another prosecutor. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, a judge has vacated the murder conviction of a man who has spent 32 years in jail for a crime he always maintained he did not commit. The former sheriff of Los Angeles County has been found guilty of charges of obstructing an FBI investigation into the abuse of prisoners in L.A. County jails, including the beating of prisoners who were handcuffed. Lee Baca ran the L.A. County Sheriff's Department for 15 years and was one of the most powerful sheriffs in the United States. He now faces up to 20 years in federal prison on charges related to his attempts to thwart the FBI's investigation, then cover up his efforts. And boxing legend Muhammad Ali's son, Muhammad Ali Jr., says he was questioned at a U.S. airport for the second time within a month, this time at the airport in Washington, D.C., where he was seeking to board a flight to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where he lives. Muhammad Ali Jr., or Muhammad Ibn Ali, says he was flagged by TSA, then asked for his Social Security number, his place of birth, and a U.S. passport to board the flight, even though he'd already shown his U.S. driver's license. Muhammad Ali Jr. was also stopped and questioned for over 2 hours about his name and religion in late February when he flew into Florida from Jamaica, where he was honoring Black History Month. This is Muhammad Ibn Ali speaking on Democracy Now! After that first stop.
The first question they asked me was, what's my name? The second question was, where did I get my name from? And the third question was, what religion are you? And so I answered, my name is Muhammad Ibn Ali. And I said, I got my name from my mother and father. They raised me. They gave me the names Muhammad Ali from birth. And I said, I'm Muslim. Obviously, I think they didn't believe me, so they took me into another room, the room in the back, and asked me the same series of questions. And so it really struck me as a surprise, shock, and awe because I'm an American citizen. So I don't see why he even stopped me in the first place.
To see the whole interview with Muhammad Ibn Ali, again, Muhammad Ali's oldest son, as well as his mother, Khalila Ali, who also was taken into custody and questioned the first time around. Go to DemocracyNow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump has unveiled his 2018 budget proposal to Congress, which calls for an unprecedented $54 billion increase in military spending while slashing environmental, housing, diplomatic, and educational programs. The budget would also cut spending for the State Department and USAID by 28% and slash billions of dollars in funding for the United Nations. The Office of Management and Budget Director describes Trump's proposal as an America First budget. The big winners are the Pentagon and Homeland Security. Trump's requesting a $2.8 billion increase in funding largely to pay for expanding the border wall and hiring 1,500 new Border Patrol and ICE agents, despite the fact that for over a year he said Mexico would pay for that wall, which Mexico has adamantly refused to do. The big losers are almost every other sector of government. The National Institutes of Health would see its funding slashed by 20%, and Trump is proposing a 31% cut to the Environmental Protection Agency, along with the elimination of 3,200 jobs there. If approved, the EPA's budget would become the smallest it's been in 40 years. The budget calls to end funding for the Clean Power Plan, international climate change programs, climate change research, and related efforts. It also reduces Superfund cleanup funding and eliminates funds to clean up the Great Lakes and Chesapeake Bay. Meanwhile, Trump's budget calls for the outright elimination of 19 agencies, including the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which supports public radio and television stations across the country, the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. The Education Department would see a $9 billion cut. Even as so-called school choice programs would receive $1.4 billion more in funding. Trump's Education Secretary Betsy DeVos has been a major backer of such programs, which include vouchers for private and religious schools that divert public funding out of public school system. Numerous programs to help the poor are on the chopping block, including the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which helps the poor pay for heat during the winter, the Legal Services Corporation, which funds free legal aid nationwide, and the Community Development Block Grant Program, which partially funds, among other things, Meals on Wheels to feed the elderly, the poor, veterans, and the disabled. During Thursday's news conference, OMB head Mick Mulvaney described the budget as compassionate when he was asked about cuts being made.
Just to follow up on that, you were talking about the steel worker in Ohio and the coal miner in Pennsylvania and so on, but those workers may have an elderly mother who depends on the Meals on Wheels program, who may have kids in Head Start. And yesterday or the day before, you described this as a hard power budget, but is it also a hard-hearted budget?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I think it's probably one of the most compassionate things we can do to actually
programs that help the elderly.
You're only focusing on half of the equation, right? You're focusing on recipients of the money. We're trying to focus on both the recipients of the money and the folks who give us the money in the first place. And I think it's fairly compassionate to go to them and say, look, we're not going to ask you for your hard-earned money anymore. Single mom of 2 in Detroit, okay? Give us your money. We're not going to do that anymore unless we can guarantee. Please let me finish. Please let me finish. Unless we can guarantee to you that that money is actually be used in a proper function. And I think that is about as compassionate as you can get.
On Capitol Hill, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi responded to the budget proposal by accusing the Trump White House of attempting to deconstruct the federal government.
This is a budget of the deconstruction of the federal government. They are deconstructionists. They have said that. I mean, they make no bones about that. They have, if one thing, listen to what they say. There is clarity. They want to deconstruct. In this case, you see what they're doing in terms of infrastructure.
Pelosi appeared to be referencing a recent comment by White House Chief Steve Bannon.
I think if you look at the lines of work, I kind of break it out into 3 verticals or 3 buckets. The first is kind of national security and sovereignty, and that's your intelligence, the Defense Department, Homeland Security. The second line of work is what I refer to as economic nationalism. The third, broadly, line of work is what is deconstruction of the administrative state.
To get response to Trump's budget, we'll, after break, speak with longtime consumer advocate, 4-time presidential candidate Ralph Nader. Stay with us. Keep it healthy by war paint here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. To get response to President Trump's 2018 budget proposal to Congress, which calls for an unprecedented $54 billion increase in military spending, while slashing scores of other programs and eliminating whole agencies, we go to Ralph Nader, 4-time presidential candidate, longtime consumer advocate and corporate critic. Ralph, your response.
Well, so much for Donald Trump's campaign promises to the forgotten men and women of America. They're the ones who are the big losers, as you pointed out with your many examples of these budget cuts. Overall, this is a budget that reflects corporatism, militarism, and racism. The mask is off, Donald Trump, his braggadocio, his lurid promises, his assurances that everything will be safe and all people will have health insurance and there'll be plenty of jobs. The mask is off. The fangs are now out. And he is collaborating with what is on the record the most vicious, ignorant Republican Party in its history since 1854. Senator Robert Taft, a conservative in the Senate in the 1950s, would have been astonished at the viciousness, the corporatism, the militarism, the racism of these Republicans, with few exceptions. Now, when you go into this 50-page or so budget, the details will all come out, Amy, in May in a bigger budget. When you go into it, you see that Sean Spicer's daily assurances that they want to go after what he calls inefficiency, waste, and government duplicity leaves out hundreds of billions of dollars of corporate fraud on the taxpayer. For example, they talk about the need to cut health care in this way and that way and push 14 million people off the health insurance rolls in a year and 24 million by 2026, according to the Congressional Budget Office or thereabouts. Just look at this. He says he doesn't want to fund programs that don't work. Okay. Almost $10 billion a year since Reagan, a year, is spent on a total boondoggle project in the Pentagon called ballistic missile defense. It doesn't work. It won't work. We're talking about the intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Society of Physicists, which include physicists who consult with the Pentagon, have said that it won't work. It's too easily decoyed by balloons. There are a lot of other easier ways to get nuclear weapons in a country than this way. And yet, as a corporate welfare program for Raytheon, Boeing, and others, it goes on every day. Now, this is a budget inside the Pentagon that's bigger than the entire budget of the Environmental Protection Agency. So you see, they're not going after the corporate crime, the corporate waste, the corporate fraud that lathers itself throughout the federal budget. Imagine, they talk about health insurance programs. Okay, so they're going to squeeze Medicaid. They're going to threaten to corporatize Medicare. They're cutting taxes on the drug companies, which was going to pay for Obamacare, on the health insurance companies, on the medical device companies, a few little taxes on the rich, getting rid of all of those in the pursuit of efficiency. Now, look what they don't talk about. They don't talk about what the Government Accounting Office of the U.S. Congress said years ago, that 10% of all health care expenditures in this country goes down the drain because of computerized billing, fraud, and abuse. And that is considered a conservative figure by the expert on this, Professor Malcolm Sparrow at Harvard University. Now, that means $340 billion, that's with a B, dollars this year down the drain. So if they're interested in efficiency, why don't you go after corporate crime? Just go to corporatecrimereporter.org and you'll see more of this. The second thing that's fascinating and very tragic is that when they talk about health care and efficiency, they're not talking about the huge numbers of people who die because they cannot afford health insurance to get diagnosed and treated in time. And now it's about 35,000 a year. That's based on an extrapolation from a Harvard Medical School peer-reviewed study that appeared in the Journal of Public Health in 2009. They never talk about that. They never talk about 60,000 people losing their lives every year due to air pollution, EPA figures. They never talk about 58,000 people losing their lives due to workplace-related diseases and trauma, OSHA figures. So we know what their game is. So this whole corporatism, militarism, racism is a huge opportunity for just 1% of people becoming active and focusing on the one branch of government that can have beneficial consequences for the 2018 election, as well as stop the Trumpsters in their tracks, and that's the U.S. Congress. So you had less than a couple 100,000 people in the last few weeks, Amy, apart from the demonstrations in Washington on January 21st, go to congressional town meetings. And the Republicans who were there came back to the Congress, and they were shuddering. They said, what's going on here? I mean, something's changing. The seats are no longer empty. They used to have town meetings where sometimes the staff was more numerous than the attendees. Now, there are 3 major recesses in Congress, 2 coming up before the 1-month August recess. Fill those seats. If the Congress people do not have town meetings, they're already considering canceling them or having telephone town meetings. So much for meeting the people. Then you have your own town meetings. You announce your own town meetings, and you have a formal summons to your senators and representatives on a set date in a convenient public location where they have to address your agenda. That's why I wrote this book, Breaking Through Power, a little paperback, 140 pages, and it shows the way, how very few people have changed our country throughout the history, and it never takes more than 1%, often far less than 1%, to do so. So this is a great opportunity. By being so cruel, vicious, and blatantly apparent in trying to further transform our government into the pits of militarism, corporatism, and racism, it can become like a boomerang if people take advantage of it.
Well,
the summons itself, Amy, is in this book. The formal summons by the people back home to the senators and representatives.
Well, you certainly see the effect of this, for example, on Senator Tom Cotton and the massive anger and response when he held a town hall meeting with thousands there. You see Darrell Issa in California. Perhaps for the first time we've seen him changing as a result of the huge town hall meeting after he refused to, as we see all over the country, people put up wanted signs for their Congress members and actually take out ads in the papers saying wanted or have you seen.
Yes, and none of that, but one of the worst members of Congress now, head of the Oversight Committee in the House, Jason Chaffetz from Utah, found 1,000 people at his town meeting with 200-300 outside. They couldn't get in. They're trying to say, you know, these are just professional organizers and they're paid. There was a 60-year-old couple in western New York that came in with a sign and said, "We're not paid, Congressman Reed, but you are," which raises the question. Once people back home say to their members of Congress, "Don't you dare pass any cuts for the vulnerable, the poor, the middle class, unless you have to share the same one." So if they had a terrible health insurance bill, that the members of Congress have to be under it. Now they have taxpayer-paid, nice health insurance bill, they have nice life insurance, health insurance rather, plan, a nice life insurance plan. They even have housing assistance. They get almost $200,000 a year, and they have housing assistance, and they have huge pensions. So if you force them to basically say, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You want to do it to us, you, our representatives, so-called, then you're going to have to adhere to the same standards. You got to have face-to-face interaction with members of Congress, not just massive rallies where the energy often goes into the ether on a weekend. You've got to get them into these public auditoriums or town halls back home where you confront them face-to-face. Here's another problem.
Wait, let me go to the clip of Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, who was confronted, to say the least, by an absolutely packed auditorium with perhaps as many people outside as well, or more.
But that's one reason why so many people come to the United States to get health care, because our health care system is the best in the world.
So my question is, if we're so concerned about the deficit, why are we building a wall that costs $20 billion?
So that was Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, who was fierce in taking on President Obama. But he came back from this town hall meeting and he said, talking about the Affordable Care Act, you have to do this slowly. You have to start again. There is no rush. Ralph Nader, talk about what's happening specifically around the Affordable Care Act.
What's happening is you have left-right opposition to what the Republicans and Trump are doing. That's the big opportunity now. I think Senator Cotton was shaken because he looked at that auditorium and he said, you know, some of these people are my supporters. And when you get a left-right alliance back home on the Senator's representative, it's politically unstoppable. So you have this so-called health insurance system. It's not health care. Often it's confused. A health insurance system proposal that is going to throw millions of people off the rolls. It's soliciting corporate support by getting rid of these taxes I mentioned on the health insurance industry and the medical device. But the hospital lobby is upset with Trump on this proposal. They see real problems down the road, and they're already putting ads in papers, and they're going to be joining with a lot of citizens in opposing this. Now, there is an argument, Amy, that these crazy proposals, they're so nutty. I mean, they're cutting further the IRS budget so it can't collect any of the $430 billion that is uncollected taxes in this country. How are they going to pay for all this stuff, this infrastructure and so on? A lot of this stuff is really nutty. They're increasing the Department of Homeland Security budget, but the indications are they want to cut the Coast Guard budget so they can use money to build the wall. They're going to further debilitate the hard-pressed Coast Guard, which is providing security and rescue on the coastlines of America. But what I think is going on here is these are trial balloons. Trump has this idea throughout his business career and bankruptcies where he says outrageous things, and then he backs down a little, and people say, oh, he's really much more reasonable. So I think we're seeing here a trial balloon situation to get the response. And in May, they'll probably moderate these cuts. But make no mistake about it. When you have Steve Bannon in the White House, when you have the Roy Cohen in the White House, name is Steve Miller, basically influencing or pushing the more extreme attributes of Donald Trump in terms of militarism, corporatism, and racism, there's going to be a lot of tension with some of the heads of the cabinets. And that's going to be in the news shortly. There's going to be a lot of tension, for example, between the Secretary of the Interior, who does not want to sell off the public lands, who's looking at a budget which is going to facilitate the selling off of some of the public lands.
Before we get to public lands, I want to ask you about Meals on Wheels.
Yes.
During Thursday's news conference, the OMB head, Mick Mulvaney, described the budget as compassionate when he was asked about cuts being made.
Just to follow up on that, you were talking about the steel worker in Ohio and the coal miner in Pennsylvania and so on, but those workers may have an elderly mother who depends on the Meals on Wheels program, who may have kids in Head Start. And yesterday or the day before, you described this as a hard power budget, but is it also a hard-hearted budget?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I think it's probably one of the most compassionate things we can do to actually
programs that help the elderly.
You're only focusing on half of the equation, right? You're focusing on recipients of the money. We're trying to focus on both the recipients of the money and the folks who give us the money in the first place.
So he's saying the reporter is only focusing on the person who'll lose Meals on Wheels, an elderly, perhaps disabled veteran, Ralph Nader.
Yeah, look at the asymmetry, the cruel asymmetry. He's a very glib guy. You're going to get used to him, Mick Mulvaney. Extremely radical, extreme in terms of cutting budgets that deal with vulnerable, sick, powerless people. He's a bully, pure and simple. But there are other budgets that are going to be cut. Law enforcement on nursing homes are going to be cut. Public transit support is going to be cut, like Amtrak, that affect lower-income people. So we're looking here. We should also pay some attention to the Democratic Party, Amy. Can they rise to the occasion? I mean, look at the wonkish talk that you just showed a clip of Nancy Pelosi, deconstruction of the federal government. Boy, that really excites people to get out on the streets, doesn't it? They got to talk in common language. People are going to lose their lives because of this budget, here and abroad. They're cutting support for international famines. They don't want our country to be a humanitarian power, just a military brute force power. We've got a situation where you have a regime that's going to be very soft on corporate crime. After all, you got a former businessman, Donald Trump, who shafted his consumers his workers, his creditors, used bankruptcy in his terms as a competitive advantage, tried to avoid all possible taxes. He's shut down casinos, unemployed workers. Atlantic City is increasingly desolate economically, in part due to his bad business acumen. So what you have is, what are the Democratic Party going to do? You have this group, indivisible.org, which tells you, by the way, when there are town meetings with members of Congress back home. But what are the Democratic Party going to do? Are they going to field candidates in all 50 states who are viable? Are they going to spend their time dialing for corporate dollars, or are they going to go the Bernie Sanders way in small contributions in big volume? Are they going to really push for single payer? There are 64 members of the House, Democrats, who've signed on to John Conyers' single payer. It's H.R. 676, the gold standard. And they're keeping quiet about it. They're not pushing it because Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer tell them, keep quiet about single payer, supported by 60% of the American people already, Ralph, according to a Pew poll.
Ralph, let me take that for one example. How would you see that playing out if at this point, when there's major questioning of Obamacare, but clearly the Republican Party is crumbling over the repeal and replace of whatever Ryan has put forward? Clearly, it's not going to be in the form he wants it. If you see this as the moment for single payer, for Medicare for all, how would you see it working? How would you see them strategizing to introduce it now?
Well, it's a good idea for some of the progressive press to start talking about it instead of getting mired in what's being done to Obamacare. You almost never see the questions, Chuck Todd and others on Sunday TV programs, so they get it into the public dialogue. But here's what I see. Check out the Wall Street Journal recently. There was a lead editorial on what's going on with Obamacare and the Republicans, et cetera. And at the end, they said, if the Republicans lose this battle to get rid of Obamacare, they might as well get on board with single payer, because that's going to be the future of politics. And that was reaffirmed by a columnist in the Wall Street Journal very recently this week, Henninger, who basically said the same thing. So here you have these right-wing corporatists basically saying, if the Republicans fall on this attempt to create this cockamamie system that deprives people of health insurance and gets rid of the ways to fund it by all these tax cuts on these corporations and so on, if they fail, then the only alternative left, that's the way they talk in the Wall Street Journal, is full Medicare for all, everybody in, nobody out, free choice of doctor and hospital, none of these narrow networks like in West Virginia, and which is called single payer. So the opportunity for the Democrats is classic. This is the time to move. And what do you see? The chief issue of Senator Bernie Sanders when he was running for president last year was full Medicare for all, single payer. Has he introduced a bill yet? He hasn't even introduced a bill yet in the Senate. Here's the leader of the single payer movement being told by Chuck Schumer and others, stay low. Keep quiet, Bernie. We got to deal with the Republicans trying to dismantle Obamacare.
Let me go to foreign policy very quickly. You have the Secretary of State, former head of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, now in Asia. In Korea, in South Korea, he goes to the demilitarized zone. He says that the U.S. is going to take a different approach, may well take a military approach. At the same time, on the same trip, he endorses the massive cuts to the State Department. And we know the Defense Secretary, James Mattis, once famously said, while serving as the commander of U.S. Central Command, if you don't fund the State Department fully, then I need to buy more ammunition. Is this budget in itself leading to war?
Well, it certainly diminishes the diplomatic capability and the foreign service capability of the State Department. And what do you think is going to take fill the vacuum? But the State Department itself, under both Republicans and Democrats, and Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright, Miss Rice, they were all militarists. And you began to wonder, the militarist language coming out of the State Department was often more militant than coming out of the Department of Defense. So even though the budget is going to be cut, the question is the culture of the State Department going to be true to their ancient charter, which was not just dealing with customs, but being the harbinger of diplomacy, the harbinger of soft impact on the world, the harbinger of negotiations. For example, all this talk on cyber warfare and cybersecurity, there isn't a single move by our federal government in the last 20 years to bring all these nations together for an international treaty on cyber security and cyber warfare, like was done in nuclear arms control with the Soviet Union and the chemical and biological warfare treaties. Rex Tillerson is sort of a dilemma wrapped into a conundrum. We don't know what's going on with him, other than he's very, very low-key. But I was just
not just low-key, it's secretive, not allowing any reporters on the plane, but a reporter with a news organization most people don't know the name of that was set up by two Republican consultants who's not covered the State Department in any regular way before. But, Ralph, before we end, the whole issue of Donald Trump saying that President Obama wiretapped him. We just have less than a minute right now before we move on to our next segment.
Well, first of all, it's been repudiated by his Republican allies in the House Intelligence Committee. That's a pretty severe thing. Second, he's in control of all the classified information. He's now president. He can say to the NSA, the CIA, he can say the FISA court decisions, bring them to me and prove my point, which was charging Obama absurdly with wiretapping Trump Tower in New York. And he hasn't done that. And they say he hasn't done it because he doesn't want to see this interfering in the investigation. He wants Congress to do so. Okay, already his own Republicans on the Intelligence Committee are repudiating him. I think there should be a national petition demanding that Donald Trump do what he's never done in his life, and that is publicly apologize to President Obama. It's not that President Obama didn't start 6 undeclared wars in 6 countries abroad in the Middle East and elsewhere, which Donald Trump is pursuing. But on this one point, he's got to show some humility and remorse.
Ralph Nader, we want to thank you for being with us. Longtime consumer advocate, corporate critic, former presidential candidate. His most recent book, Breaking Through Power, It's Easier Than We Think. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, why the increasing calls for a top White House aide to resign. Stay with us.
Just wait a while. He's in the back, he's in style. And then I'll give him a smile. He won't forget it. Say to me I am, say to me I am, say to me I am. I'll wait a while. I'll bring it back, I think I'm in style. Then again I am like a child when I say, oh,
Trick Candle by Nina Diaz here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Is President Donald Trump's top counterterrorism advisor, Sebastian Gorka, a member of a Hungarian far-right Nazi-allied group? That's what leaders of the group have told The Forward, a leading Jewish American newspaper. On Thursday, The Forward reported members of the Tezirend elite order confirmed Gorka took a lifelong oath of loyalty to their group, which is listed by the U.S. State Department as having been under the direction of Nazi Germany during World War II. The Tezirend was established in 1920 by self-confessed anti-Semite and Hitler collaborator Admiral Miklos Horthy. Questions first emerged about Gorka's ties to the group after the website Loblog published photographs of Gorka wearing a Vitesse Rend medal on his lapel at a presidential inauguration ball January 20th. Like many members of the Vitesse Rend, Gorka has also listed his name with a lowercase v in the middle, Sebastian L.V. Gorka, including during his 2011 testimony before the House Armed Services Committee. Gorka has denied reports of his involvement with the Nazi allied group, telling Tablet magazine, quote, "I've never been a member of the Vitesse Rend. I have never taken an oath of loyalty to the Vitesse Rend. Since childhood, I've occasionally worn my father's medal and used the V initial to honor his struggle against totalitarianism," he said. If Gorka is a member of the group, but did not disclose this in his immigration application, it could make him inadmissible to the United States under the Immigration and Nationality Act. The Anne Frank Center is calling for Gorka's resignation and says he represents a broader problem of anti-Semitism within the Trump administration. It released a statement. It reads in part, quote, "How many ducks in the Trump White House must walk, talk, and quack anti-Semitically before our country wakes up and sees the greater problem? This administration has staff with shockingly anti-Semitic past, and it's hard to imagine they have nothing to do with the horrifically weak reactions to anti-Semitic hate crimes that we see coming from this administration." The quote read from the Anne Frank Center. This revelation comes as Jewish community centers and synagogues around the country reported another wave of bomb threats over the weekend. The Jewish Community Center Association North America says it's documented 128 incidents at 87 community centers so far this year. For more, we go to Chicago, where we're joined by the reporter who broke the story for The Forward, Larry Kohler-Esses, the Forward's editor for special projects. His report headlined "Exclusive Nazi Allied Group Claims Top Trump Aide Sebastian Gorka as Sworn Member." Larry, explain what you found.
Well, I worked together with my colleague in Budapest, Lily Baer, and we were going off of some of the work that was done at Loblog and with others, where people noticed that Sebastian Gorka wore the medal of the Vitesse Rend and asked him why, and he said, well, it's a way to honor my father, who spent years fighting fascism and spent years fighting communism. His father was born in Hungary. His parents fled Hungary after the 1956 revolution, and Sebastian Gorka himself was born in London. He wore these medals. He told the press that it was just about his father. And Lily, my colleague in Budapest, was able to find 3 senior members of the Vitesse Rend in Budapest who said, no, he's actually a member. Excuse me, in Hungary. Some were not in Budapest. He's actually a member. And this began to seem very notable because I found that the organization, because of its history, was listed by the State Department in its current Foreign Affairs Manual as a group under the direction, historically, during World War II, under the direction of Nazi Germany. Because of this, the Foreign Affairs Manual listed that there was a presumption of inadmissibility to immigrants who were affiliated with this organization. Now, to be clear, there's a couple of nuances here, and I should be very clear about this. After World War II, under the terms of the treaty with Hungary and the Allies, the Vitesse Rend was forcibly disbanded. But it reconstituted itself outside of Hungary among exiles who were loyalists to Admiral Horthy, the wartime ruler of Hungary, with the same ideals, with the same leadership, and the same ideology. And after the fall of communism in 1989, the Vitesse Rend came back to Hungary and reconstituted itself there. It split into 2 factions based on personal leadership, and Sebastian Gorka, we were told by the members of the group, is affiliated with the faction called the Historical Vitesse Rend. We looked a lot at what Gorka himself has written. He has often written in publications. He's written in publications that are notably anti-Semitic. He's partnered to start a political party in Hungary with known anti-Semites from the far-right Jobbik party, but we have not found that he himself has ever said or written anything anti-Semitic. But the question is one about his partners and who he works with and whether he actually is a staunch opponent of anti-Semitism when he works closely with groups like this.
After the website Loblog published photographs of Sebastian Gorka wearing the medal of the Nazi collaborators, Gorka responded in a video posted on Breitbart News.
I'm Sebastian Gorka, and I'd like to tell you a story about my father and my family's history and why I wore a medal that reminds me of what they suffered under the Nazis and under the communists. In 1979, my father was awarded a decoration for his resistance to dictatorship, and although he passed away 14 years ago, I wear that medal in remembrance of what my family went through and what it represents today to me as an American.
Larry Kohler asks us if you could respond to what he is saying. This was posted at Breitbart News. He used to work for Breitbart under Steve Bannon, top aide to President Trump.
Right. Well, the Vitesse Rend has some pretty firm rules. You do not get to wear the medal and use the V initial unless you join, and joining involves taking a lifelong oath, oath of fealty to the organization and its principles and to Hungarian nationalism, which the organization is steeped in. We spoke with a senior member of the group who took note of the V that he used both on his doctoral dissertation in Hungary and when he testified before Congress. And he said, of course, no V without the oath. So under these terms of the organization, if he was trying to honor his father, he was dishonoring the rules of the organization that his father was honored by. I cannot read his mind. I was not in Hungary, but we then found 3 separate sources in the organization who said he did take the oath. He was initiated in the formal initiation ceremony into the organization. So, Larry, if Gorka was a part of this organization and he didn't disclose it when he came to this country, he wasn't born in the United States, what does that mean? It means that his status as an American citizen and as a legal immigrant could be undermined. I'm not an expert in immigration law, but in our reporting we spoke to Bruce Einhorn, who was an immigration judge for 17 years. He now teaches immigration and nationality law at Pepperdine University. And perhaps most importantly for this unique situation, before that, he was Deputy Director of the Justice Department's Office on Special Investigations. This was the unit in the Justice Department charged with finding and deporting Nazis and members of other extremist groups who got into the United States by lying about or hiding their background. And he told us that someone who is asked, as you are asked, in these applications for immigration and citizenship about the organizations you joined, and you don't write it down, is vulnerable to a reversal of their legal immigration status or their citizenship status. He told us that there would be defenses for Gorka if he was prosecuted, but as a prosecutor with OSI for that many years, he said, this is a case that I would take up. It's a legitimate case, and it would be a challenging one, but it's a winnable one. So that is the state of the technical legal arguments involved, but they all spring from the fact that he was obligated, if he was a member, to disclose it at the time of his immigration and citizenship application. Now, David Duke has defended Sebastian Gorka on Twitter, writing, quote, "How is Sebastian Gorka a Nazi? The man is not only pro-Israel, he is also pro-Jewish. Strange time to be alive. They've truly lost it," David Duke wrote. Yes. Well, there is a phenomenon that we have commented on in the forward where you have people who, because of the role Israel plays in the Middle East and because of their bias against Muslims, they like Israel. And yet, domestically, they can be anti-Jewish. It is possible to be anti-Semitic and pro-Israel. It's a phenomenon that's emerged. I don't know if Gorka is that. As I said, we have never found that Gorka wrote anything anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. What we found are these troubling associations. He said in his White House official statement that it was absurd and outrageous for anybody to say that he was anything other than opposed to anti-Semitism. I don't know how you define opposition to anti-Semitism, but partnering with a group like Vitesse Rend and with former members of the far-right anti-Semitic Jobbik Party would exclude many definitions of being opposed to anti-Semitism.
Larry Kohlrausis, I want to thank you for being with us. Larry is the Forward's editor for special projects. We'll link to your piece, Exclusive, Nazi Allied Group Claims Top Trump Aide Sebastian Gorka as Sworn Member. And that does it for our show. A very happy birthday to Ariel Boone. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Noreen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Massoud, Sharina Nadura, Andre Lewis,